The evening was settling into a comfortable lull, the kind that follows the initial burst of excitement at a gathering. It was a small affair. Just a few of us gathered to celebrate Alan's birthday. His home, an old, sturdy structure standing since the early 1900s, held its own charm. Its wooden floors creaked with whispers of the past, and the walls were adorned with photographs that seemed to tell stories of their own. The atmosphere was cozy, filled with the warm glow of candles and the mellow hum of conversation, mingled with the soft notes of background music. We sat around the living room, comfortably ensconced in plush sofas, sipping wine and sharing laughter. Alan, the birthday celebrant, was in high spirits, flitting between guests, ensuring everyone had enough to eat and drink. He was always the perfect host, gracious and attentive, never missing a beat, a trait we all admired. Among the guests was Julia, who had been a close friend of Alan's for years, and Tom, an acquaintance from his work. And then there was me, quietly observing, soaking in the warmth of the gathering. As the evening wore on, it was time for the customary exchange of gifts. Alan, ever the enthusiast for surprises, beamed as he accepted the assortment of brightly wrapped packages. The room was filled with laughter and clapping as each gift was unveiled. Books, a vintage record, a bottle of single malt whiskey that Alan adored. But it was the last gift that caught everyone's attention. A small box wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a simple twine. Alan picked it up, his expression curious. "Who's this from?" he asked, scanning the room, but nobody claimed responsibility. "A mystery gift," he chuckled, as he carefully untied the twine and peeled back the paper. Inside was a small, ornate box, delicately carved with intricate designs. Alan opened it slowly, revealing a glinting object nestled within, a coin unlike any I had ever seen. It was silver, its surface etched with symbols that none of us could decipher. There was a moment of collective silence as we all leaned in closer, captivated by the enigmatic coin. Alan held it up to the light, turning it over in his hand. "What do you make of this?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Julia leaned closer to examine it, her eyes narrowing as if to pierce through its secrets. "It looks ancient," she mused, "and those symbols, they're nothing I recognize." Tom, who had been quiet for most of the evening, spoke up. "It's probably something rare, maybe even valuable," he suggested, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and suspicion. We all sat back, allowing Alan to pocket the coin, our intrigue piqued, yet unsure of what to make of it. The conversation gradually drifted back to more mundane topics, but there was an undercurrent of unease, a sense that this unassuming gift had shifted the evening's mood. It was later, much later when the guests had begun to leave, that the first disturbance occurred. Alan, who had been clearing up some of the discarded wrapping paper, suddenly stopped, his face growing pale. He was staring at his hand, at the spot where the coin had been resting moments before. His skin bore strange marks, faint but discernible, mirroring the symbols etched on the coin. He laughed it off, attributing it to an overactive imagination and the effects of a few too many drinks. But I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, an unease that mirrored my own. "It's nothing," he assured us, though the words felt empty. The next day, as I went about my routine, I couldn't shake the memory of the coin and the marks it had left behind. It was like a shadow at the back of my mind, a persistent itch that refused to be ignored. I found myself drawn back to Alan's house that evening, under the guise of returning a forgotten item. In truth, I wanted to see if everything was all right, if that nagging sense of foreboding had any merit. Alan greeted me with his usual warmth, but there was an edge to his demeanor, a tension that hadn't been there before. He tried to brush it off, attributing it to work stress, but as the evening wore on, the cracks in his facade began to show. He was distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere, eyes darting occasionally to the spot where the coin now sat on his mantle. I asked him about it, careful to keep my tone light. "You seemed a bit off last night after the party. Everything okay?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know," he admitted. "Ever since I touched that coin, I've been having these strange dreams. Vivid dreams that feel more real than they should. And today at work, I could swear I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye." A chill ran down my spine at his confession. "What kind of things?" "Just shadows, I guess. Flickers in my peripheral vision. It sounds crazy, I know." We both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him it was nothing, but I couldn't bring myself to dismiss his concerns. There was something about the way he spoke, a sincerity that was hard to ignore. Over the days that followed, Alan's situation seemed to escalate. He spoke of feeling watched, of hearing faint whispers when he was alone. The marks on his hand, once faint, had grown more pronounced, and his sleep continued to be plagued by troubling dreams. Each time I visited, the atmosphere in his house felt heavier, the shadows more pronounced, as if the house itself was conspiring against him. I urged him to see a doctor, a therapist, anyone who might offer some explanation for what was happening. But Alan, ever rational, refused. "It's just stress," he insisted. "It'll pass." But it didn't pass. The tension reached a breaking point one night when I received a frantic call from Alan. His voice was a hushed whisper, trembling with fear. "I need you to come over," he said. "Please, I don't know what's happening." I hurried over, my heart pounding with every step. The house was in darkness when I arrived, the only light spilling from the living room where Alan sat, the coin clutched tightly in his hand. He looked up as I entered, his eyes wide with fear. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep seeing things, hearing things. It's like the coin is showing me something I'm not supposed to see." He handed me the coin, his hand shaking. I hesitated before taking it, feeling its cold weight in my palm. The symbols seemed to writhe under the dim light, and for a moment I felt a disorienting pull, as if the coin was trying to draw me into its secrets. Alan's voice broke the spell. "You have to help me," he pleaded. "I don't know how to stop it." We sat together, surrounded by shadows, trying to make sense of the chaos. The coin seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, an unyielding presence that refused to be ignored. I suggested getting rid of it, burying it, anything to sever its grip on him. But the coin was relentless. Even after Alan agreed to lock it away, the disturbances continued, each more intense than the last. It was as if the very act of trying to rid himself of it only served to strengthen its hold. The climax came one stormy night when the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and doors. I found myself back at Alan's house, drawn by a sense of urgency I couldn't quite explain. Inside, the air was heavy with tension, every creak and groan of the old house amplified in the oppressive silence. Alan was in the living room, his face drawn and pale. The coin was back on the mantel, gleaming ominously in the flickering candlelight. He was pacing, muttering to himself, his eyes wild with a desperation that cut through me like a knife. "I can't escape it," he said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "It's everywhere." I reached for his arm, trying to ground him, but he jerked away, his gaze fixed on the coin. "It wants something. I don't know what, but it won't stop until it gets it." Before I could respond, the room seemed to shift around us, the shadows deepening, converging. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a terror that was both foreign and intimately familiar. The air vibrated with a low hum, a sound just on the edge of perception, growing louder with each passing second. Alan staggered back, his hands pressed to his ears as if to block out the noise. His eyes met mine, wide and pleading, before he turned and fled from the room, the front door slamming open and shut behind him. I followed, stumbling out into the storm, the wind tearing at my clothes and drowning out my shouts. Alan was nowhere to be seen, lost to the night and the chaos, leaving only the echo of his fear behind. In the days that followed, I searched for him, reaching out to friends and family, scouring the places he frequented, but he seemed to have vanished without a trace. The police were sympathetic, but with no evidence of foul play, there was little they could do. The case gradually faded from their priority list, leaving me with only questions and the lingering weight of guilt. The house remained empty, its windows dark and vacant, a silent witness to whatever had transpired within. I found myself visiting often, drawn by a need to understand, to unravel the mystery that had consumed Alan. The coin, I discovered, was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Even now, months later, the memory of that night haunts me. I feel its presence at the edges of my consciousness, a phantom whisper that refuses to be silenced. Sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I imagine I hear Alan's voice, calling out from the shadows, a haunting echo of the friendship we once shared. And in those moments, I can't help but wonder if the coin found him again, or if it ever truly left him at all. The thought lingers, a chilling reminder of the uncertain fortune that one gift had brought, and the unknown paths it might yet lay before me. There is an old college town, nestled between a forest and a winding river, where life moves with the slow grace of an autumn leaf, carried by the breeze. The town is known for its quaint charm, its cobblestone streets echoing with the laughter of students and the chime of bicycle bells. The air feels crisp, a prelude to winter's chill. But for now, the trees are dressed in a spectrum of reds and golds. I moved here just a few months ago, transferring to the college halfway through my sophomore year. At first, everything seemed perfect, an idyllic setting for my studies, a fresh start away from the noise of the city. My apartment was a snug little attic room in an old Victorian house, its windows framed by ivy and its floors creaking with stories of the past. My neighbors were unremarkable, other students like me, except for Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived on the ground floor. She had a penchant for knitting and baking, and every so often, I would find freshly baked cookies on my doorstep. Classes at the college were demanding, as expected, but I welcomed the challenge. I fell into the rhythm of student life easily, my days filled with lectures and library visits, my evenings often spent at the local cafe, where students gathered to sip coffee and exchange stories. It was there I first heard about the cursed luck. It was a Friday evening, the cafe buzzing with the giddy anticipation of the weekend. I sat with a group of classmates, a mix of old friends and new acquaintances. The conversation turned to local legends, as it often did, and that's when someone brought it up. "Have you heard about the cursed luck?" asked Jacob, a senior, with a reputation for knowing all the town's secrets. His eyes glinted with mischief as he leaned in, lowering his voice as if he were about to disclose a great conspiracy. "They say there's a coin, a simple silver coin, that can change your fortune. But it's cursed. It'll give you everything you ever wanted, for a price." The group leaned in, intrigued. I couldn't help but chuckle, dismissing it as an exaggerated ghost story. But Jacob continued, unfazed by my skepticism. "The coin surfaces once in a generation, and whoever possesses it is granted unimaginable luck. You find money on the street, aces in exams without studying, everything falling perfectly into place. But it doesn't last forever. Eventually, the luck turns sour. Tragic accidents, sudden misfortune, the kind of bad luck you can't escape." I listened, amused but unmoved. It was just another tale, told to spook new students, a bit of folklore to add to the town's character. The conversation shifted, as it always does, and soon we were discussing weekend plans, the legend forgotten. Or so I thought. Life continued in its pleasant cadence, the legend slipping from my mind as days turned to weeks. The town embraced me with its autumnal beauty, and I lost myself in the routine of academia. It was during one of my solitary morning walks by the river that everything began to change. The morning was unusually quiet, the fog lingering longer than usual, wrapping the riverbank in a shroud of mystery. I wandered aimlessly, enjoying the solitude before the day demanded my attention. My foot struck something solid, and I glanced down to find a coin partially buried in the dirt. Bending down, I retrieved it, a simple silver coin marked with an unfamiliar emblem. It was nothing special, yet it held a curious allure. I slipped it into my pocket, thinking little of it, and continued my walk, the incident fading into the background of my mind. That day, however, marked the beginning of a series of improbable events. Later, as I made my way to class, I stumbled upon a $20 bill fluttering in the breeze, snagged against a tree. In the library, I found the exact book I needed for my paper, despite it being listed as unavailable. My professor unexpectedly canceled a quiz I hadn't prepared for. These incidents, while minor, felt like little gifts from the universe. Days turned into weeks, and the peculiar fortune followed me like a shadow. I aced exams without breaking a sweat, discovered an unexpected scholarship had been applied to my tuition, and won a raffle at a local store. Luck seemed to favor me, each day bringing a fresh miracle. I recalled Jacob's story, but dismissed the connection. Logic told me it was mere coincidence, yet a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. It wasn't until the mid-semester break that I began to question my good fortune. My best friend Rachel visited from my old college, her presence a comforting reminder of home. Over coffee, I recounted my recent streak of luck, expecting her to share in my amusement. Instead, she looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. "That's not normal, you know," she said, her voice tinged with unease. "No one is that lucky. Maybe you should be careful." I brushed off her concern, too accustomed to my newfound luck to see the shadow lurking beneath it. But Rachel's words planted a seed of doubt that grew with each passing day. The first hint of trouble came surprisingly subtly. I misplaced my keys, a common enough occurrence, but it took me hours to find them, wedged inexplicably between the cushions of the couch. Then, my phone screen cracked without any recollection of dropping it. Little inconveniences began to pile up, each one a reminder that even in paradise, shadows lurk. The turning point came one chilly evening as I returned from the library. The street was quiet, the town drenched in the soft glow of street lamps. As I crossed the road towards my apartment, a car came around the corner, faster than it should have. For a moment, time seemed to slow, and I was paralyzed, caught in the headlights' glare. The driver swerved, tires screeching, missing me by inches. I stood frozen, heart pounding, the reality of what nearly occurred sinking in. The incident shook me more than I cared to admit, and I found myself thinking about the coin still nestled in my pocket. The small, seemingly innocuous object now felt like a burden. I recalled Jacob's story, the ominous twist of fate that followed the charm, and I couldn't help but wonder if my luck had indeed taken a sinister turn. As the days passed, the sense of dread grew, and my once bright world began to dim. Small misfortunes plagued me. A forgotten deadline, a misplaced wallet, a misunderstanding with a friend. Each seemed trivial in isolation, yet together they wove a tapestry of unease. One evening, desperate for answers, I retrieved the coin from its resting place. Holding it under the lamp's light, I studied its surface for the first time since I found it. The emblem was unlike anything I'd seen, an intricate design that seemed to shift and shimmer in the light. It felt heavy in my hand, more substantial than its size would suggest. I decided to seek out Jacob, hoping he might have more insight into the legend. I found him at the cafe, surrounded by friends, his laughter filling the room. I waited until he was alone before approaching, the coin burning a hole in my pocket. "Do you remember the story of the cursed luck?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the cafe's din. Jacob looked at me, his expression shifting from amusement to seriousness. "Yeah, why?" he replied, eyes narrowing as he studied my face. I hesitated, the weight of the coin in my pocket, a constant reminder of the stories I'd been trying to dismiss. "I think I might have found the coin." For a moment, Jacob was silent, his face a mask of disbelief. Then slowly he nodded. "If it's true, you need to get rid of it. The longer you hold on to it, the worse it gets. The luck always turns." His words were like a cold wind cutting through the warmth of the cafe. I nodded, understanding what I had to do. But how does one dispose of a cursed object? The answer eluded me, and I left the cafe with no more clarity than when I arrived. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety, each moment tinged with the fear of what might come. My luck continued to unravel, each new misfortune more troubling than the last. I avoided the riverbank, unwilling to revisit the place where it all began. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the key to ending this nightmare. One rainy afternoon, as the sky wept and the town lay muted beneath a curtain of gray, I found myself drawn to the river, the coin clutched tightly in my hand. The water flowed steadily, its surface rippling with the rain's touch, an ever-moving tapestry of nature's design. I stood at the riverbank, the coin feeling impossibly heavy, as if the weight of the world rested upon it. Memories of the past weeks flooded my mind, the improbable luck, the creeping misfortune, and the near miss that had shaken me to my core. With a deep breath, I hurled the coin into the river, watching as it vanished beneath the surface. I expected something, perhaps a sign that the curse was lifted, a sudden return to normalcy. But there was nothing, just the rain, the river, and me standing in silence. Slowly, I made my way back to my apartment, my heart lighter, yet burdened with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The days that followed were uneventful, the streak of bad luck seemingly broken. Yet, the experience had left an indelible mark, a lingering fear that clung to the edges of my consciousness. Life in the college town continued, the illusion of normalcy restored. I resumed my studies, met friends at the cafe, and walked the cobblestone streets with a newfound appreciation for the ordinary. But the legend of the cursed luck stayed with me, a whisper in the back of my mind. I never spoke of it to anyone else, not even Jacob, who had given me the advice that possibly saved me. It was as if acknowledging the experience would somehow invite it back into my life. And so I carried on, the memory of the coin a secret I held close, a reminder of how easily fortune can turn. The town remained as it always was, its charm unchanged, yet beneath its surface lay stories untold, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover. Some nights, when the wind howled and the shadows stretched long, I would find myself thinking of the river and the coin lost to its depths. I imagined it there, glinting silently in the dark, waiting for the next person to stumble upon it, to experience the intoxicating thrill of perfect luck, and the inevitable descent into darkness that followed. And in those moments, as the town slept under a blanket of stars, I could almost hear the river's whisper, a soft, eerie lullaby that echoed through the night, a reminder that some stories are never truly over. I settled into the predictable rhythm of my days at the Gazette, the only newspaper office nestled in our quaint, rural town. Its brick facade exuded an old-world charm, housing stories of decades past within walls lined with yellowed clippings and ancient typewriters. The tick of the clock was our only constant companion in the office, a metronome pacing our daily grind. My desk was cluttered but comforting, surrounded by a cacophony of ringing phones, muffled voices, and the occasional crackle of the police scanner. Each morning began with a ritualized scan of the day's news, a cup of coffee in hand. My tasks were as predictable as the sunrise, covering local council meetings, announcing the latest high school football scores, and occasionally the much-savored human interest story. It was a life imbued with a quiet monotony, soothing in its familiarity, until the day I received the letter. The envelope was nondescript, no return address, the paper slightly warped as if it had journeyed through the elements. My name was scrawled across the front in an uneven script, jagged letters that spoke of urgency, or perhaps derangement. I opened it with a sense of curiosity, expecting a reader's tip, or perhaps a letter from a local eccentric. What emerged was a single sheet of paper, its message stark and chilling in its simplicity. On October 15th, a soul shall depart from this realm, claimed not by the hand of fate, but by the design of another. Beware. I stared at the note, heartbeat drumming in my ears. It was a strange, unsettling epistle, the kind that one might imagine in stories of cursed whispers and ghostly apparitions. My initial impulse was to dismiss it as a prank, a morbid jest from an overzealous reader. Yet, some intangible quality in the words, perhaps their ominous cadence, niggled at the back of my mind. I tucked the note into my desk drawer, resolving to disregard it. As the days inched toward October 15th, I found myself unable to shake the unease that had seeped into my routine. My eyes traced the familiar landscape of our office, the clacking keys, the blaring scanner, the gossip over coffee, but everything seemed tinged with a foreboding hue. I began to scan the faces of my colleagues, wondering if they too harbored secrets or premonitions that danced hidden beneath their calm exteriors. The first disturbance arrived not through grand theatrics, but rather in the subtle shift of a friend's demeanor. Anna, a fellow journalist and one of the few people I counted as close in this small community, began to exhibit a peculiar change. She was always vivacious, her laughter echoing down the corridors like a playful melody. But as the date loomed, she grew withdrawn. Her laughter faded, replaced by a haunted look that shadowed her bright eyes. "Are you all right, Anna?" I inquired one afternoon, concerned by the pallor that seemed to have settled over her. She hesitated, her gaze flitting toward the window where rain beat a relentless rhythm against the glass. "Just some personal stuff," she replied vaguely, offering a wan smile that failed to reach her eyes. I wanted to press her, to uncover the source of her unease, but she turned back to her work, effectively ending the conversation. Still, a gnawing suspicion rooted itself within me. Could she be involved in the message I received? The thought was absurd, yet it clung to my mind like a stubborn parasite. The day of October 15th arrived with a thick fog that blanketed the town, a harbinger of the unsettling events to come. I arrived at the office with a sense of trepidation, my heart thudding a discordant symphony in my chest. The note seemed to pulse with life in its hidden drawer, a silent reminder of the prophecy it held. As the day wore on, tension coiled within the office walls. Conversations were muted, the usual banter stifled by an oppressive atmosphere that felt almost palpable. I forced myself to focus on my tasks, though my eyes drifted frequently to the clock, its hands inching inexorably toward an unknown climax. It was nearing dusk when the phone rang, its shrill insistence slicing through the air. I answered automatically, my mind elsewhere, until the words on the other end jolted me to attention. "This is Officer Daniels. There's been an incident at Anna's house." My stomach dropped, the room spinning in a dizzying swirl of sound and color. I barely registered my own response, a hurried acknowledgement before I was out the door, the phone abandoned mid-conversation. Anna lived on the outskirts of town, her cottage nestled amidst a grove of ancient oaks. As I approached, the scene was a tableau of chaos. A crowd of curious neighbors, the wail of sirens, and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles casting eerie shadows in the encroaching dark. A police officer barred my way, but I managed to convey my connection to Anna, and he allowed me through with a terse nod. The interior of the house was a stark contrast to the tumult outside. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, heavy and suffocating. I found her in the living room, a small crowd of officers and paramedics gathered around. Anna lay on the floor, her ashen face framed by the halo of her unruly hair. A paramedic shook his head, and I knew, in that instant, that she was gone. The world tilted on its axis, the room spinning in a nauseating blur. I staggered backward, needing air, space, anything to escape the reality closing in around me. As I stumbled out of the house, I clutched the note from my desk, the words burning into my consciousness with relentless clarity. Amidst the chaos, a troubling question surfaced, one that demanded an answer. Was Anna's death truly an accident, or had the letter's prophecy come to pass? The official report would later cite a heart attack, a sudden and tragic end that seemed incongruent with her youth and vitality. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lurked beneath the surface, an unseen hand orchestrating events with malevolent intent. The days that followed were a haze, filled with funerals and condolences, each interaction a reminder of the void left by Anna's absence. Yet, amid the grief, the letter's warning hovered over me, casting a long shadow that stretched into every corner of my life. I became consumed by the need to understand, to unravel the mystery that had entwined itself with fate's threads. I delved into research, scouring archives for any mention of similar letters or unexplained deaths. My nights were spent haunting the library, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating dusty tomes and fragile newspapers from years gone by. Patterns emerged, vague whispers of ancient curses and prophetic notes that foretold doom. Each revelation deepened the chasm of fear within me, as if I were skirting the edge of an abyss. In the quiet solitude of my apartment, I began piecing together the fragments of the mystery, my walls papered with connections and theories. I became a recluse, driven by an obsession that alienated me from the world beyond my window. Friends called, their voices tinged with concern, but I ignored them, unable to explain the insidious fear that thrummed like a living thing beneath my skin. Midnight became my confidant, the hours when silence reigned and the veil between worlds seemed thinnest. It was during one such night that I made a breakthrough, the pieces falling into place with a clarity that stole my breath. There were others, scattered across the country, bound by the same cryptic notes and untimely deaths. Each case was eerily similar, each victim marked by a letter that heralded their demise. Armed with this knowledge, I resolved to confront the source of the letters, to reveal the truth lurking in the shadows. My journey took me to distant towns and forgotten corners, where I unearthed stories of those who claimed to have cheated the ominous fate foretold by the notes. Their tales were filled with dread and desperation, yet they offered a glimmer of hope, that the future was not set in stone, that the hand of fate could be stayed. As I delved deeper, the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, every whisper of wind and creak of floorboards a reminder of unseen forces at play. I became hyper-aware, my senses attuned to the slightest anomaly, my heart a wild creature caged within my chest. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, a chance encounter with a reclusive antiquarian in a rain-soaked alley. He spoke in riddles, his eyes glinting with a knowledge that seemed both ancient and arcane. He revealed that the letters were a curse, an echo of a forgotten pact made long ago, designed to feed on the fear and uncertainty that plagued its recipients. But he also shared the key to breaking the cycle, a simple act of courage and defiance, a refusal to bow to the specter of fate. Armed with this revelation, I returned to the Gazette, the familiar surroundings offering a semblance of comfort. I penned an article detailing my journey, exposing the curse and its machinations, determined to shed light on the darkness that had claimed Anna and so many others. It was a cathartic release, each word a weapon against the fear that had gripped me for so long. The article was published, its impact rippling through the community like a stone cast into still water. Conversations sparked, and the town buzzed with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity, a collective determination to reclaim control over their destinies. Yet, even as I basked in the relief of having broken the curse's hold, a part of me remained vigilant, acutely aware of the lingering threat that hung like a specter over my life. The memory of Anna, her life cut short by a cruel twist of fate, haunted me still. Her laughter, once a melody that brightened our days, echoed in my mind, a reminder of the fragility of life and the shadows that lurk at its edges. In the quiet moments, I pondered the nature of fate and the power of belief, of how the mind can create and destroy, bind and release. Though the letters had ceased, their legacy remained, a cautionary tale whispered among the townsfolk, a reminder of a time when darkness crept too close. I found solace in the ordinary once more, in the gentle hum of the Gazette, the predictable rhythm of my days. Yet, in the stillness of night, I often awoke with a start, the echoes of a warning whispering through my dreams, urging vigilance, and the reminder that the line between normalcy and nightmare is all too thin. As a lifelong resident of the sleepy town of Eldermore, nestled snugly between two meandering hills and surrounded by dense woods, I'd grown accustomed to the comforting monotony of small-town life. Main Street was the heart of our little community, a single thoroughfare lined with quaint, old-fashioned shops and cafes, each with its own history and charm. The town was the kind of place where most folks knew each other's names, and gossip traveled faster than the autumn leaves swirling through the air. My days followed a predictable rhythm: breakfast at the local diner, then a leisurely stroll to the bookstore where I worked. The bookstore was a cozy refuge, its shelves brimming with dusty volumes that whispered secrets from eras long past. I loved the tranquility, the way the soft light filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the wooden floors. It was during one of these ordinary days that I first noticed something peculiar. At first, it was merely a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, the kind of thing you dismiss without a second thought. But as days turned to weeks, the sense of being watched became more pronounced, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist in ways they hadn't before. The feeling was subtle, almost tantalizingly elusive, but persistent. One particularly crisp autumn morning, as I ambled down Main Street, my attention was caught by a figure standing across the street. They were dressed in a long, dark coat, their back to me. Something about their stance struck me as odd, as if they were deliberately avoiding being seen. I shrugged it off, assuming they were waiting for someone, but as I continued on my way, I noticed more people in the same position. They were scattered along the street, each one turned away, their faces obscured. The sensation of unease grew as I observed this pattern over the next few days. These faceless figures seemed to multiply, appearing at odd intervals along my daily route. I began to dread my walks, though I couldn't articulate why. They never approached or acknowledged me, nor did they interact with anyone else. Yet their presence was undeniably unsettling. I confided in my friend Clara, who worked at the diner. She listened patiently but dismissed my concerns with a laugh. "Maybe you're just seeing things, Alex. Autumn can play tricks on the mind," she said, her voice light. "Besides, this town's full of characters. Could be some new artist types looking for inspiration." Her words offered little comfort. I knew what I saw, and more importantly, I knew how it made me feel, like I was being drawn into a shadowy conspiracy that I couldn't fully comprehend. As days passed, the faceless figures began to dominate my thoughts. I started keeping a journal, documenting each encounter with meticulous detail. I hoped that by understanding their patterns, I might uncover their intentions, or at least assure myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Then, one afternoon, as I sat alone in the bookstore, the doorbell chimed softly, and yet no one entered. I waited, expecting to hear the familiar creak of the floorboards, but silence reigned. A chill crept up my spine, and I glanced toward the door, only to find it ajar, swinging slightly on its hinges. I hesitated before stepping forward to close it, feeling the cold, metallic handle beneath my fingers. As I returned to my seat, I saw a shadow flit across the window, lingering for a brief moment before vanishing. Heart pounding, I rushed outside, but found only the empty street, the familiar storefronts staring back at me with their usual indifference. The days turned darker, shorter, and my encounters with these faceless figures became more frequent, more disconcerting. They no longer confined themselves to the street, but began appearing in unexpected places. At the grocery store, the library, even the cemetery on the outskirts of town. Their presence was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a persistent sense of disquiet that I couldn't shake. One evening, as I made my way home, the wind howling through the trees, I took a shortcut through the park. The path was dimly lit, the lampposts casting long shadows that danced eerily on the ground. I heard footsteps behind me, echoing my own. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, the footsteps following suit. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw one of them, a figure standing still beneath the flickering lamplight. The featureless face sent a jolt of terror through me, and I stumbled, nearly losing my balance. By the time I regained my footing, the figure had vanished, leaving me questioning my own sanity. Sleep became elusive, my nights haunted by dreams of blank faces and whispered secrets. I awoke each morning feeling exhausted, the boundaries between dream and reality blurring with each passing day. My journal grew thicker, filled with hastily scribbled notes and sketches, a desperate attempt to capture the essence of what plagued me. I finally decided to take matters into my own hands. I spent hours in the town's library, poring over old records and newspapers, searching for any mention of these faceless entities. The librarian, Mrs. Harding, was curious about my sudden interest in the town's history, but I offered no explanation. It was during one of these research sessions that I stumbled upon a collection of letters, penned by a former resident of Eldermore, dated nearly a century ago. The letters spoke of strange occurrences, of faceless people who followed the author, their presence a harbinger of doom. The writer, John Matthews, had documented his experiences in great detail, his words echoing my own. Matthews' writings revealed an unsettling pattern. The faceless figures appeared to those who, knowingly or unknowingly, ventured too close to some hidden truth buried within the town's past. The letters were fragmented, some pages missing, but the implication was clear. The faceless ones were guardians of a secret they would protect at all costs. I felt both validated and horrified. My experiences were not unique, but rather part of a legacy that stretched back through the decades. I knew now that I was ensnared in something far beyond my understanding, and I feared where it might lead. Determined to learn more, I resolved to visit the cemetery mentioned in Matthew's letters. where he claimed to have discovered something that drew the attention of the faceless ones. On a fog-laden morning, I navigated the winding path to the cemetery, the air heavy with anticipation and dread. The cemetery, veiled in mist, was eerily silent, the only sound the soft crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I wandered among the tombstones, my breath visible in the chill air. As I examined the inscriptions, I noticed a peculiar tombstone, its surface worn smooth by time. It bore no name or dates, only a single symbol, a spiral etched deeply into the stone. As I traced the spiral with my fingers, a sensation of vertigo washed over me, and I stumbled backward, the world spinning around me. In that moment, I knew I had touched something significant, something that connected me to the faceless entities. The fog seemed to thicken, the air becoming cloying and oppressive. I sensed movement at the periphery of my vision and turned to see them, dozens of faceless figures emerging from the mist, surrounding me with their silent, implacable presence. They stood in a circle, their attention focused solely on me, and for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of understanding emanating from them. I was not meant to be here, I realized. I had crossed an invisible boundary, trespassed upon their domain. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, the figures parting to allow me passage. As I fled the cemetery, their presence lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the secrets I had unearthed. In the days that followed, the faceless ones withdrew, their shadowy forms no longer haunting my steps. But the sense of unease persisted, a constant reminder of the knowledge I had stumbled upon. I had glimpsed the hidden underbelly of Eldermore, a truth that refused to be buried. I returned to my routine, the bookstore and Main Street once again familiar and comforting. Yet, I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the faceless ones were still out there, waiting. They were part of the town's fabric, woven into its history, guardians of secrets that no one dared to uncover. As I sat by the window of the bookstore one afternoon, the sun casting long shadows on the floor, I pondered the nature of the faceless ones. Were they protectors or wardens? Were they a product of imagination or something more profound? Though I had no clear answers, I knew one thing for certain. The faceless figures would remain with me, an indelible part of my psyche, a reminder of the thin veil between the known and the unknown. I had glimpsed the darkness that lay beneath the surface of my tranquil town, and I could never fully return to my previous ignorance. The fear they instilled lingered, a quiet echo in my mind, a testament to the fragile boundary between curiosity and madness. As the days turned to weeks, I found solace in the familiar once more. Yet I remained ever watchful, knowing that some doors, once opened, could never be closed. And so, life in Eldermore continued, the faceless ones as much a part of its history as the people who walked its streets. As I walked down Main Street, the autumn leaves swirling around me, I couldn't help but wonder if someone else would eventually stumble upon the same truth, if they too would find themselves staring into the abyss of the unknown. Perhaps one day, the faceless ones would reveal their purpose, their silent vigil drawing to an end. But until that day came, I would carry the secret with me, a burden and a gift, a reminder of the hidden depths that lay beneath the surface of our everyday lives. The town of Eldridge was the kind of place that seemed to be permanently etched in the sepia tones of a bygone era, a place left untouched by the passing of time and the hustle of the modern world. Nestled in the embrace of ancient trees, the houses were quaint, with gabled roofs and white picket fences, the air often filled with the scent of pine and the distant murmur of the river that wound like a silver ribbon through the heart of the forest. It was a town so small that every inhabitant was not just a neighbor, but also a familiar story, a living chapter in the town's modest history. I had come to Eldridge seeking solitude, a reprieve from the chaos of city life. The small wooden house I had rented stood alone at the river's edge, its windows facing the water, allowing the gentle sound of the current to lull me to sleep each night. I spent my days wandering the forest, breathing in the crisp, clean air, and my nights at the local pub, listening to the townsfolk's stories, tales that sometimes carried a weight of their own, whispers of a curse, hushed and half believed. It was during one of those languid evenings, as I sat nursing a pint, that I first heard mention of the faceless boy. The tale was recounted with a peculiar mixture of fear and reverence, the kind reserved for the inexplicable. According to the townsfolk, he was a specter bound to the forest, a punishment meted out to those who dared acknowledge his existence. To see him was to invite misfortune. I listened with a bemused detachment, attributing the story to village superstition, the kind of folklore that every small town seemed to haunt itself with. Yet, as I walked back to my house that night, the path illuminated by the pale light of the moon, I couldn't shake a peculiar feeling, as though someone unseen was matching my steps, a presence lurking just beyond the reach of my senses. The days passed in their usual rhythm, and slowly the story of the faceless boy began to fade from my thoughts, replaced by the mundane concerns of daily life. That is, until the first disturbance. It happened one mist-laden morning as I sat on the porch, sipping my coffee and watching the river flow by. There was a peculiar silence, the kind that falls when the world seems to hold its breath. From the corner of my eye, I caught a movement along the riverbank. Turning my head, I saw a figure standing there, partially obscured by the fog. A boy, or so he seemed, dressed in clothes so old-fashioned they might have been plucked from a sepia photograph. But it was his face, or rather the absence of it, that seized my breath and froze me in place. Where features should have been, there was nothing but a smooth, unblemished surface. I blinked, my mind scrambling for explanations, telling myself it was a trick of the light, a mirage conjured by the mist. But when I looked again, the figure was gone, leaving only the whisper of the river and the rustle of leaves in the wind. I shook off the encounter, dismissing it as a figment of imagination, yet an unsettled feeling nestled in my chest, like a stone that refused to dislodge. As days turned into weeks, the encounters grew more frequent. I would catch glimpses of him in the forest, a fleeting shadow amidst the trees, or reflected for a heartbeat in the river's surface. And with each sighting, came an escalation of inexplicable occurrences. Objects in my house began to move on their own accord. Doors left ajar would close sharply, and shadows seemed to crawl along the walls in the periphery of my vision. I awoke one night to find the house filled with a soft, mournful music, a haunting melody that seemed to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was as though the presence that lingered had begun to inch closer, testing the boundaries of my reality. I knew what the townsfolk would say, that I should ignore it, pretend not to see. But curiosity, that insidious urge, gnawed at me. I found myself drawn to the forest more often, wandering the paths that twisted through the dense thicket, hoping and dreading to catch sight of the enigma that haunted me. Each time I glimpsed him, there was a momentary ache, a pang of something that felt like sorrow, though whether it was his or mine, I could not tell. The climax came one stormy night when the wind howled through the trees like a pack of wolves, and rain lashed against the windows with a fury. I lay in bed, the room cast in restless shadows, sleep a distant prospect. It was then I felt it, an overwhelming urge, a compulsion to step outside into the tempest. The wind tore at my clothes as I ventured out, the rain blinding in its intensity. Yet there was a pull, a magnetic force, drawing me towards the riverbank. And there he was, standing still as stone amidst the chaos of the storm. This time, I didn't look away. I stepped closer, my heart a drumbeat in my chest, and found myself standing face to face with the faceless boy. In the cacophony of wind and water, there was silence between us, a stillness that defied the tempest. In that moment of confrontation, something shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and a truth, unbidden and unwelcome, unfurled itself in my mind. The boy was not an entity separate from me, but a reflection, a dark mirror that echoed my fears, my sorrows, the parts of myself I had long buried and chosen to forget. I reached out, my hand trembling, and where I should have felt nothing, there was a warmth, a pulse of life. The world around us seemed to pause, the rain suspended in midair, the wind hushed, and in his facelessness, I saw my own reflection, a canvas unmarked by time or memory. Yet, in acknowledging him, in recognizing the parts of myself I had denied, I had sealed my fate. The stories of the townsfolk were not wrong. The curse was not his presence, but the admission of it. The boy began to dissolve, his form unraveling like smoke in the wind, and with him, a part of me seemed to fade, an echo that would forever reverberate through the confines of my soul. In the days that followed, a lingering fear settled in the periphery of my mind. The town resumed its quiet existence. The forest remained unchanged, yet I could not shake the sense that something unseen walked with me, a shadow tethered to my being. The house by the river no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a reminder of the boy who wore my face. Each night as I lay in bed, I would hear the faint strains of that mournful melody, a reminder of the veil between worlds, a whisper of the faceless truth I had glimpsed. And though the boy was gone, His presence lingered in the corners of my mind, in the solemnity of the river's endless flow, a specter of what was and what could never be erased. The town of Eldridge continued its unhurried journey through time, the stories of its curse carried on the wind, a cautionary tale for those who dared to see beyond the veil. And I, a reluctant witness to its legacy, remained, haunted not by the faceless boy, but by the reflection of my own unacknowledged fears, a shadow that would follow me to the end of my days.